Hi guys and welcome to a new video. In today's video we're gonna continue the series Study the Classics. Today, Garry Kasparov. We will have a look at the game Magerramov versus Kasparov, and Kasparov shows his true skill playing dynamically and really fighting for the initiative at all cost. Let's see how the game started. Knight f3, knight f6, d4, e6, c4, d5, Queen's Gambit, and black is now fianchettoing the bishop to b7. White plays queen b3, putting some pressure against d5. Black develops, and white decides to fix the structure in the center and saying, okay, black has this weakness on the c-file, and whenever black pushes here, then he will either have an isolated pawn on d5 after he trades, or he might also have the hanging pawns in the center after takes and takes. But let's see, what did white have in mind here? Rook d1, piling up on the d5 pawn, but Kasparov goes c5 anyway. So here you might wonder, what is his intention if white just captures on c5? Because the b pawn is even pinned, right? The bishop is undefended and black cannot even take back. But Kasparov, of course, did not blunder this one, but he intended to play with the initiative here and play knight d7. And this is quite a common pawn sacrifice, that you, after a capture on c5, just develop the knight, letting him take here and then jump with the knight to c5 and really get the center rolling. There are several ideas which we will also see later. So, yeah. White decided not to be greedy, but to win some time, force the bishop to c6 and then hit the bishop while safely blocking this isolated pawn. White establishes this d4 square and black cannot really break through there. But Kasparov found a way to break through in the center. And this seems a bit surprising, and indeed knight to d4 is already a big mistake. And if you want to challenge yourself, you want to try to find the best move here, you can pause the video. We will continue with the game and see how Kasparov really took the initiative and played dynamically, using the fact that the white king is still in the center and that white is not yet fully developed. So how can we do that? We need to be forcing, because if we are slow, white will also just finish the development and then play against the isolated pawn. That's probably what white intended and expected, but Kasparov surprised him by giving up his bishop on d4. Now white, of course, was not planning to take with the e-pawn, because then the e-file would be open and black would get very good and active play. However, this was already the lesser evil. However, also black is not in any danger here, as both sides have an isolated pawn and black is just okay. However, white wanted to take with the rook, of course, saying black has this isolated pawn and I will attack it later. I already piled up 3 pieces and kind of imagine black needs to defend. Then black is just passive with this isolated pawn and this bad bishop. But Kasparov, of course, did not go for knight f6, but instead went for dynamics. Knight to c5, hitting the queen and now hitting the rook. And due to all those threats, white is not yet ready to take there with the knight. And that's his problem. So he needs to move the rook. Where does the rook go? Of course, it stays on the d-file, putting pressure on the d5 pawn. And now you could still wonder, what is black doing now? Still, it seems like d4 it's not possible, because white is defending with 3 pieces, while we only have 2 pieces. And I mean, how to prepare it? We really need to be fast, because otherwise white is just castling or white is just taking there. So when coming to such situations where the static points are all in your opponent's favor, like here, white is piling up against the isolated pawn and the isolated pawn is weak, we sometimes need to seek dynamic solutions. And dynamic solutions, when you're looking out for them, you should consider two things. The first one is sacrifices, piece sacrifices, and the second thing is pawn breaks. And so it's no surprise that Kasparov had been thinking about this d4 push anyway, because the pawn is weak anyway, and when we trade this pawn for some dynamic pluses, we might get something. So let's have a look at d4, which he actually played and proves to be the best move. White took, which is the most obvious reply, but what do we get in return? We get an open e-file, and indeed we can use it, but it needed a bit of calculation, but Kasparov of course did this. He played rook e8, not being afraid of this fork, but let's see why. So if this fork is coming, we have a discovered check. Bishop e2 blocks the check, but this g2 pawn drops. However, this is not yet the end of the variation because white has king f1. Now both pieces are attacked. But I'm pretty sure Kasparov had seen this all in advance and he saw bishop d7 and white is unable to take the knight due to queen g5. King needs to go back, check, king needs to go even further back and queen g2, and now rook f1 would fail to checkmate thanks to the pin on the e-file. So this fork, unfortunately for white, doesn't work, so white went for f3. Also note that bishop e2 is never really possible because it will always drop this pawn. This is also something we get by playing the dynamic d4, opening up the bishop and making white's development harder. So d4 is the kind of sacrifice you should feel it might be needed, because if we are slowed, statics are in our opponent's favor, and once we play it we get certain positional things. We get a good bishop, we get an open e-file, and this should give you the hope that it's enough. Of course, it will always need some concrete calculation. This d5 push must be calculated through, but still d4 is the way to go, the way to fight for the initiative, and Kasparov was extremely good at it. Let's see how the game went. After rook e8, white played the reasonable looking move f3. What is the idea? The idea is just to answer any knight check with king f2, just hiding away, also covering the g2 pawn and being able to move the bishop out later. But Kasparov here came with a fantastic shot, which is bishop to f3. This looks incredible because f3 seemed to be defended twice, but it's not. Let's see why. If white takes with the queen, he will drop the queen. But be careful, always have your two options, and once you have it, you can make a real choice. Don't just play the first move which comes to your mind. So we have a choice to win the queen. How to do it? And once you have a closer look, you will see, once you take here, you will also be pinned and maybe lose your own queen. So the safer and the clean way to win the queen is just knight g5. There is no pin against our queen, and probably white's best is to play something like queen e2 or rook e2, but yeah, probably queen e2, getting a rook, but it's not enough. So in the game white took, of course, with a pawn, but now there came queen h4 check, no big surprise. Now rook f2 is absolutely forced because this would run into double check and mate. And after rook f2, there is another check. Knight f4 was also winning. Bishop e2, another check. It's very nice. Everybody's pinned here. Nobody can take the knight. And the king needs to run to f1, another check, another pin. Attacking the rook, bringing the next rook in. Queen to e1 and rook to d3. Queen to f2, knight to f3. At this position I want to stop for a while because it's really fantastic. It seems like everything is hanging, but basically nothing is hanging in black's position. But let's see why. White is really pinned in all directions, and we will figure out why, for example, the bishop is pinned. Why can't the bishop take the rook? Because we have a checkmate on h2. Now the king is no longer able to go to f1 to e1, and the rook on g2 is pinned. So this is a smothered mate in the middle of the board. Why can't the bishop take here? Yes, because black could take here on f3, winning the white queen. Why couldn't the queen take here? Of course, because the queen would be lost and black also would win the queen. Is there any other capture? Not really. This rook is pinned, so no capture on g7. So the only move white could play is just wait with the rook to h1, also covering this pawn which was previously under attack. But still, white cannot move really. And yeah, there is just one threat which white now created by protecting h2. Since this is no longer checkmate, white would now be ready to take the rook. But no problem, we can move the rook. And now, again, we can see white is absolutely paralyzed. This rook cannot move. It can, but it doesn't improve anything. This move is pinned. This rook is pinned. The queen really doesn't have any good squares, because queen g3, the only reasonable square, would run into check, and the queen is dropping after rook takes g3. This knight is also not able to move because the bishop needs defense, and the bishop himself needs to stay there, otherwise there is rook e1, for example. So white was just waiting around, hoping that black cannot improve. And yeah, of course, Kasparov found a way to do this. First, sidestepping, just in case g7 would ever drop, it wouldn't drop with a check. And finally, bringing in the last attacker, a single pawn. But this is too much. White cannot maintain the knight on c3, and thus he will, break under the pressure against e2. White resigned at this point because something like a3, a5, it would just delay the inevitable b4, because also b4 himself it's not possible as the knight would drop. So despite being a whole piece down here, Kasparov really managed to play active, play dynamically, create a lot of threats, control the board and keep the pressure, keep the control, and really won a nice game here. So that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know in the comments below if you knew this game, if there are any questions, and yeah, if you like my content, please like and subscribe, and I hope to see you in the next one. Goodbye.